I had been looking forward to this trip for weeks. The flight was supposed to be long, but I didn't mind. I had booked my ticket early, carefully choosing a window seat so I could watch the clouds roll by and let my thoughts drift as the hours passed. It wasn't just about comfort for me. The window seat gave me peace, a little corner of the world where I could rest, read, and think without feeling trapped between strangers. It was mine, and I had paid for it fairly. As I placed my backpack under the seat in front of me and buckled in, I felt content. I was ready for this journey, but peace never lasts long when entitlement walks in. The cabin was still filling up with passengers when I first heard them, two sharp voices echoing down the aisle. At first I thought maybe someone was arguing with their kids or trying to organize a family seating arrangements. That kind of thing happened all the time, and usually it passed quickly. But as the voices grew louder, I realized this wasn't an ordinary family discussion. The words carried a tone of authority, as if the owners of those voices believed the whole world should bend to their will. I turned my head slightly, just enough to see them. Two women storming down the aisle like they owned the plane. Both were dressed in flashy clothes, their hair perfectly styled, their expressions twisted with irritation. They were talking over everyone, pointing toward the seats, and pushing their way past passengers still trying to put their bags in the overhead bins. People were staring, already annoyed, but the sisters didn't seem to notice or care. The moment their eyes locked on me, I knew trouble had arrived. "That's it," the taller sister said, pointing directly at my seat. "That's the window. Our brother needs that seat." For a second, I thought maybe I had misheard her. She couldn't possibly mean me, could she? But then both sisters stopped right in front of me, blocking the aisle and glaring as if I had stolen something from them. "Excuse me," I said carefully, trying to stay polite. "You need to move," the other sister snapped. "Our brother can't sit anywhere else. He gets the window. That's his seat." I blinked, confused. I pulled out my boarding pass, checking again just to make sure I wasn't losing my mind. "This is seat 24A, I said, showing it to them. "I booked it weeks ago." Yes. The taller one waved her hand impatiently. "But you don't understand. Our brother needs the window seat. It's important. Just move to another spot anywhere else." Her tone wasn't a request, it was a demand, the kind that assumes compliance without question. I shook my head. "I'm sorry, but I booked and paid for this seat. I prefer the window." That's when the volume dial on their voices turned up to full blast. The shorter sister leaned forward, practically shouting in my face, "Are you seriously not going to move? He needs this seat more than you do. Don't be selfish." The cabin went quiet. Passengers all around were watching now, their heads turning like an audience at a theater. I could feel the pressure of dozens of eyes on me, waiting to see what I would do. My stomach tightened, my pulse quickened. I hated confrontations, especially in public. For a brief second, I thought about giving in just to make the situation go away. But then I looked at their brother, who stood silently behind them. He looked uncomfortable, his eyes downcast, clearly embarrassed by his sister's behavior. He wasn't demanding anything. It was all them. That's when I knew I couldn't give in. "Not this time." "No," I said firmly, though my voice trembled a little. "This is my seat." The taller sister gasped, like I had committed some sort of crime. She turned to the other passengers, spreading her arms dramatically. "Can you believe this? This person is refusing to give up the seat for our brother. He needs the window, and this selfish stranger won't move." The whispers around us grew louder. Some passengers looked sympathetic toward me, shaking their heads at the sisters. Others just seemed tired, already wishing the flight would start without more delays. "Please sit down," I repeated, trying to keep my voice calm, but they didn't. They doubled down. "You're ruining his trip," the shorter one yelled. "You think your comfort is more important than his? How dare you? People like you make everything worse for families." My hands tightened on the armrest, but I refused to move. I thought about all the times I had seen entitled people like this, loud, aggressive, trying to bend the rules because they thought they were special. If I gave in now, I'd be rewarding their behavior, telling them it was okay to treat others this way. And deep down, I knew it wasn't just about a seat. It was about respect. "I'm not moving," I said again, louder this time so everyone could hear. The sisters froze, staring at me with open mouths, as if no one had ever dared to stand up to them before. The silence broke when a voice from a few rows back called out, "They should have booked the seat earlier like everyone else." A few people chuckled. Another passenger added, "Yeah, stop holding up the flight." The sisters' faces turned red with fury. Their brother tugged at their sleeves, mumbling something, but they ignored him. Instead, they turned back to me, their eyes burning with hatred. "You'll regret this," the taller one hissed. But for the first time, I felt something shift inside me. The fear that had gripped me moments before was gone, replaced with a quiet strength. I wasn't alone anymore. The cabin had seen their behavior, and people were on my side as they continued arguing with the flight attendant who had just arrived. I leaned back in my seat and looked out the window. The view was still the same runway sky, the wings of the plane, but to me, it felt different now. This little patch of space was mine, and I had defended it, and the fight was only just beginning. The argument was far from over. The sisters weren't the type to accept defeat quietly. Even after the flight attendant approached, they stood tall in the aisle, their voices sharp and relentless, as though the entire plane needed to witness their performance. "I don't think you understand," the taller sister snapped at the attendant. "Our brother needs that window seat. It's a necessity, not a choice. This passenger," she jabbed a finger at me, "is refusing to cooperate." The flight attendant, a woman with calm eyes and a professional smile, glanced at me, then at my boarding pass, before turning back to the sisters. "I understand your concern," she said evenly, "but this passenger is seated correctly. That is their assigned seat. If your brother requires a window seat, I'm afraid the arrangements should have been made at the time of booking." The shorter sister's face twisted with anger. "Are you serious? You're really going to side with them? This is customer service. Do you even care about passengers' needs?" The attendant didn't flinch. "I care about all passengers' needs. But this seat belongs to them, and I cannot force anyone to move. Please take your assigned seats so we may prepare for departure." The sisters exchanged looks, their fury bubbling beneath the surface. Their brother, still quiet, tugged again at their arms, his eyes darting nervously at the watching passengers. "It's fine," he whispered, barely audible. "We can just sit," but his words were drowned out by his sisters. "No," the taller one barked. "You deserve better than this. We're not going to let them treat you this way." The cabin air grew heavier, the tension spreading like smoke. Passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A few rolled their eyes. One man across the aisle muttered under his breath, "Unbelievable." I sat still, my heart hammering but my face calm. Every instinct told me to keep quiet, to let the flight attendant handle it, but the sisters weren't backing down. They who had turned this into a battle of wills, and they wanted me to break first. The shorter sister leaned closer to me, her voice dropping to a hiss. "Why are you doing this? What's so special about you that you can't move one row back? Are you trying to prove a point? Are you trying to humiliate him?" Her words were designed to sting, to make me doubt myself, but I refused to look away. "I'm sitting in the seat I paid for," I said firmly. "That's the only point here." The taller sister threw up her hands dramatically. "Unbelievable. We're surrounded by selfish people. No compassion, no kindness." She turned to the passengers behind her. "Would anyone else give up their seat for our brother? Anyone with a heart?" A murmur spread through the rows. A few people avoided eye contact, not wanting to get involved. But one woman across the aisle spoke up. "No one owes you a window seat. Stop disturbing the whole plane." The sisters spun on her like vipers, their voices rising again. "Mind your own business." The flight attendant stepped in, her patience thinning. "That's enough," she said sternly. "If you continue yelling, I will have to call security. Please take your seats immediately." The sisters gasped as though they were the victims of a great injustice. "Security for asking for a seat? This is harassment," the shorter one shouted. I could see the other passengers growing restless. A man in the back called out, "Just sit down already." Another added, "We all want to get going. You're holding up the flight." For the first time, the sisters looked shaken. The audience they thought would support them was turning against them. The murmurs had turned into open complaints, and the strength of numbers wasn't on their side anymore. Their brother tugged at their arms once more, his face pale. "Please," he whispered, louder this time. "It's not worth it. Just sit down." But still, they lingered. Their pride wouldn't let them surrender so easily. The taller one glared at me one last time, her voice low and venomous. "You think you've won something here. You'll regret this." I didn't answer. I simply looked back out the window, refusing to give them the satisfaction of a reaction at last. With exaggerated sighs and mutters of unfair treatment, the sisters dragged their brother down the aisle to their assigned seats. The tension in the cabin began to ease as they disappeared into the rows behind me. The flight attendant leaned down, lowering her voice so only I could hear. "You handled that very well. Thank you for staying calm." I nodded, though my chest was still tight from the adrenaline. "I just didn't want to give in to them." "You were right not to," she said with a small smile. "We see people like that more often than you'd think." When she walked away, I let out a slow breath, trying to settle back into my seat. The whispers of the passengers faded into a low hum. Some were already pulling out books or headphones, ready to move on. But my hands were still trembling slightly. I looked out the window again. The tarmac stretched out under the fading sunlight. Planes taxiing in the distance, ground crews scurrying about their duties. It should have been calming, but my mind was restless. What struck me most wasn't the shouting or the insults, it was the look on their brother's face. He hadn't asked for any of this. He had looked almost apologetic, like he wanted the ground to swallow him up. It made me wonder if he had been living with this kind of behavior from them his whole life. The captain's voice soon echoed over the speakers, announcing that we would be taking off shortly. Passengers cheered lightly, eager to finally get moving. The engines hummed to life, the plane shuddered, and the attendants began their safety demonstration. As the plane started to taxi down the runway, I let my head rest against the window. The sisters were quiet now, but I could feel their glares. On the back of my head, burning with resentment, didn't matter. I had kept my seat, but more importantly, I had held my ground. Still, something inside me knew this wasn't the end. People like them rarely stayed silent for long. The engines roared, the plane surged forward, and we lifted into the sky. As the ground fell away beneath us, I stared at the clouds outside my window, the very view I had fought to keep, and wondered just how much further this battle with the sisters would go. The first half hour of the flight was calm on the surface, but beneath it I could feel the lingering storm. The engines hummed, the cabin lights dimmed slightly, and most passengers settled into the rhythm of travel, headphones in, books open, blankets pulled over shoulders. Yet even in that quiet, I was acutely aware of the two pairs of eyes burning into the back of my head. The Karen sisters weren't finished with me. From behind my seat I could hear them whispering furiously to each other. Their voices weren't exactly loath. They wanted me, and maybe everyone else, to hear the bitterness in their words. "She's so selfish," the taller sister hissed. "Unbelievable," the shorter one agreed. "The way she looked at us, like she's better than everyone." Just wait. People like that always get what's coming. I tried to ignore them, staring out at the soft white clouds drifting past. I wanted peace, but peace wasn't something the sisters were capable of giving. Every few minutes they accidentally bumped the back of my seat, jerking it just enough to remind me they were there. First a knee pressed into the cushion, then a shove as they moved around, then the rhythmic tapping of a shoe against the frame. At first I tried to brush it off. Air travel was cramped, accidents happened, but after the fifth or sixth time, it was clear their actions weren't accidental. This was deliberate. Finally I turned around in my seat. "Could you please stop kicking my chair?" I said, keeping my voice calmed out. The shorter sister smirked. "Oh, was that bothering you?" she asked, her voice dripping with sarcasm. The taller one leaned forward, her lips curling into a fake smile. "So sensitive, you should relax." I clenched my jaw, turned back, and forced myself to focus on the view again. But it only escalated. They began talking louder, laughing exaggeratedly, tossing words like selfish and rude into their conversation so everyone around could hear. Their brother sat quietly between them, his face turned toward the aisle, pretending to be invisible. Other passengers noticed, too. A man across the row caught my eye, shaking his head in sympathy. A woman a few seats up muttered, "Some people just don't grow up." It helped a little, knowing others saw what was happening. Still, I could feel my patience thinning with every passing minute. Then came the moment that nearly pushed me over the edge. As the flight attendants wheeled the drink cart down the aisle, one of the sisters leaned forward again, deliberately, knocking her plastic cup of soda so that droplets splashed across the side of my armrest. "Oh no," she said in a voice that didn't sound sorry at all. "Did I get you wet?" A few people gasped softly. The attendant handing out drinks froze, her eyes narrowing as she looked at the scene. I dabbed at the spill with a napkin and forced myself to breathe. "Please stop," I said simply. The taller sister laughed. "Oh, come on, it was just an accident, don't be so dramatic." But the attendant wasn't fooled. "Ma'am," she said firmly, "if I see any more deliberate disturbances, I'll have to report you to the captain. I'm warning you now." The sisters' smiles faltered, their bravado slipping for a moment. They muttered under their breath, crossing their arms like scolded children. But even then, I knew they were plotting. For a brief stretch, the plane quieted again. I sipped my drink, put in my headphones, and tried to lose myself in music. The view outside was breathtaking, sunlight streaming across an endless sea of clouds. I reminded myself why I had fought for this seat. Moments like this, but the peace didn't last. Halfway through the flight, when most of the cabin was dozing, or quietly watching movies, the sisters struck again. This time, they decided to involve other passengers. The taller one leaned across the aisle to a man reading a magazine. "Don't you think it's wrong that some people won't give up their seat for someone who needs it?" she asked loudly, enough for me to hear. The man glanced at her, then shrugged. "People sit where they're assigned. That's how it works." "Exactly," another passenger muttered from a few rows back. End of story. But the sisters weren't done. They kept fishing for allies, tossing little comments around. "So selfish, so inconsiderate. People like that ruin flights." It was a performance, a desperate attempt to regain the sympathy they had lost earlier. What they didn't realize was that the more they spoke, the more isolated they became. No one was siding with them. If anything, their behavior was only turning the cabin more solidly against them. At one point, the shorter sister tried a different tactic. She leaned forward again, lowering her voice so only I could hear. "You think you've won, don't you? Sitting there smug by the window, but you don't know us. We always get our way eventually." I turned my head slowly, meeting her gaze with steady eyes. "Not today," I said quietly. She flinched, just slightly. Before scoffing and sitting back for the first time, I felt a strange sense of control. I had stopped reacting to their every jab, and that unsettled them. Bullies thrived on reactions: anger, fear, guilt. Deny them that, and they were left powerless. The flight stretched on, and gradually their voices grew quieter. Maybe they were running out of energy, or maybe they were realizing that their tactics weren't working. Either way, I leaned back in my seat and allowed myself to relax. Still, A thought lingered in my mind. This wasn't finished. People like them didn't just let things go. They'd find another way, another angle, and I was right. Toward the end of the flight, when the seatbelt sign turned on for descent, the taller sister leaned forward once more. Her voice was low, but sharp enough to cut through the hum of the cabin. "You'll regret embarrassing us like this," she whispered. "Just wait until we land." Her words chilled me, not because I believed they could do anything once the flight was over, but because they revealed something deeper to them. This wasn't just about a seat anymore. It was about pride, about dominance, about proving they could bend the world to their will. I didn't answer. I simply looked back out the window as the ground began to come into view, billow patches of green fields and winding rivers, shining in the afternoon sun. Let them plot, I thought. Let them rage. I had stood my ground, and I wasn't afraid anymore. Whatever came next, I'd be ready. The wheels touched down with a jolt, and the cabin erupted into the usual shuffle of passengers gathering bags, switching phones on, and stretching stiff limbs. But as I glanced back at the sisters, I saw the look in their eyes. This wasn't over, not for them, and deep down, I knew Chapter 3 of this story was only setting the stage for an even bigger confrontation waiting on the ground. The plane jolted to a halt on the runway, and a collective sigh of relief spread through the cabin. Seatbelts unclicked, overhead bins opened, and passengers stretched as though waking from a long sleep. I should have felt that same relief, but, instead, a heavy knot of tension sat in my chest. I hadn't forgotten the taller sister's final words. "You'll regret embarrassing us like this." As I grabbed my backpack from under the seat, I felt the prickle of eyes drilling into me. I didn't have to look to know who it was. The sisters were staring, their brother caught between them like a shadow, his face pale and unreadable. The passengers around us seemed just as aware. Some exchanged weary glances, silently acknowledging that the drama might not be over yet. The line to exit the plane moved slowly, as it always did. People shuffled forward row by row, retrieving bags, thanking the flight attendants, eager to be free. I stayed in my seat until the crowd thinned, hoping that by the time I stood, the sisters would be gone, but they lingered. Of course, they did. When I finally stepped into the aisle, the shorter sister leaned close, her voice low but sharp. "You think you're brave, don't you? Sitting there, acting like a hero. Just wait." I didn't reply. Silence, I'd learned, was more powerful than any comeback. But my heart thudded in my chest as we shuffled off the plane. The airport terminal was buzzing with life. People hurried past with rolling suitcases, announcements echoed overhead, and the smell of coffee drifted from nearby kiosks. Normally, I loved this energy, the feeling of being in transit, of moving towards something new. But today, I couldn't shake the tension crawling along my skin. The sisters followed closely behind me, their heels clicking against the floor. Their brother trudged along quietly, shoulders hunched as if he wanted to disappear. I considered ducking into the restroom or blending into the crowd, but it was too late. The taller sister snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut through the chatter of the terminal. Heads turned. "Don't walk away from us." I stopped, exhaled slowly, then turned. "What do you want?" "What do we want?" She scoffed as though the answer were obvious, an apology for humiliating us in front of the entire plane, for making our brother sit where he didn't want to sit. "You think you can disrespect us and just walk away?" I stared at them, incredulous. "I didn't humiliate you. I sat in the seat I booked, that's it." The shorter sister stepped forward, jabbing a finger toward me. "Don't play innocent. You embarrassed us. Everyone was laughing at us because of you. You could have avoided all of this by just moving, but no, you had to make a scene." My laugh came out sharper than I intended. "I made a scene. You two screamed across an airplane because you didn't get your way." A ripple of chuckles came from a few passengers walking past, people who had clearly been on the same flight and remembered the ordeal. The sisters flushed crimson, their anger intensifying. "You'll regret this," the taller one hissed again. "People like you always do." Before I could respond, a firm voice cut through the tension. "Is there a problem here?" I turned to see one of the flight attendants standing nearby, the same one who had defended me earlier. Behind her, a uniformed security officer approached, his eyes scanning the scene. The sisters immediately shifted tactics. Their scowls melted into pitiful expressions, their voices dripping with false sweetness. "Yes, actually," the taller one said. "We were treated unfairly on this flight. Our brother has special needs, and this passenger refused to switch seats to accommodate him." Then she mocked us in front of everyone. Their brother's head jerked up, eyes wide. He opened his mouth as though to protest, but the shorter sister clutched his arm tightly, silencing him. The attendant shook her head slowly. "That's not what happened. And you know it, I was there. Your brother never requested anything. You two demanded someone else's seat, and when you didn't get your way, you disrupted the entire cabin." The security officer crossed his arms. "Is that correct?" he asked me. "Yes," I said firmly. "I booked my seat. They tried to force me out of it. When I refused, they harassed me the entire flight." The officer's gaze flicked between us, weighing the tension. Then he turned to the brother. "Sir, is that what happened?" The boy, he couldn't have been older than 19, looked torn. His sister's hands gripped his arms like shackles. but something inside him cracked. His voice trembled as he finally spoke. "Yes," he whispered. "That's what happened. I didn't care where I sat. They just wanted to make a scene." The entire terminal seemed to pause for a beat. The sisters froze, their faces twisted with shock. "What are you saying?" the shorter one snapped, shaking his arm. "Don't lie." But it was too late. His words hung in the air, undeniable. The officer's expression hardened. "That's enough," he said firmly. Ma'am, you're causing a public disturbance. If this continues, I'll have no choice but to escort you out." Passengers, walking by, slowed to watch, murmuring among themselves. The sisters' performance had fallen apart, their audience lost for good. "You can't do this to us," the taller one screeched. "We're the victims here. We deserve respect." The officer didn't flinch, then start showing some. Their brother pulled his arm free, stepping away from them for the first time. His shoulders straightened, his voice steadier now. "Stop it," he said. "Just stop. I'm tired of this. You embarrassed me more than anyone else ever could." Silence crashed over the sisters. They stared at him, betrayed, as though his defiance was the ultimate treachery. The officer nodded at me. "You're free to go," he said kindly. "We'll handle this." I gave a small, grateful nod and walked away, my legs shaky but my heart lighter than it had been in hours. Behind me I heard the sisters' shrill protests fading into the background as security escorted them aside. As I moved deeper into the terminal, I spotted the brother again. He had slipped free from his sisters and now stood alone, his backpack slung over one shoulder. For a moment, our eyes met. He gave me a small, hesitant nada silent thank you before turning and walking in the opposite direction. I exhaled, letting the tension drain out of me at last. The reality check had landed, not just for the sisters, but for everyone watching. Entitlement and screaming could only carry someone so far before the truth caught up with them. And as I finally stepped outside into the cool air, I realized something important. It hadn't just been about defending a window seat. It had been about standing up for myself and maybe, in a way, helping someone else stand up too. The encounter in the terminal should have been the end of it. Security had stepped in. The sisters had been warned, and their brother had found the courage to speak the truth. For most people, that would have closed the chapter. But as I walked deeper into the airport, rolling my suitcase toward baggage claim, my mind replayed everything that had happened. The sisters' entitled behavior had been exhausting, but it wasn't what stayed with me. It was the look on their brother's face, quiet shame, the years of being pulled into battles that weren't his. He had been forced to live in the shadow of their arrogance, and when he finally broke free, it wasn't just a small rebellion. It was liberation. I couldn't shake that image as I stepped onto the escalator down to baggage claim. Around me, families reunited with hugs, business travelers checked their phones, children skipped excitedly, but I felt strangely alone. I had won my fight, yes, but it didn't feel like just my victory. It felt bigger, as though everyone on that plane had been part of it. At the carousel, I stood waiting for my suitcase, my body still stiff from the hours in the air. I saw a familiar figure approach hesitantly. It was the brother. His sisters were nowhere in sight. He carried only a backpack, his posture uncertain but lighter than before, as though a heavy weight had been lifted off his shoulders. For a moment, we just stood there in silence. Then he spoke. "I'm sorry about them." His voice was quiet, almost swallowed by the noise of luggage thudding onto the carousel. I shook my head. "You don't owe me an apology. None of this was your fault." His eyes darted to the floor, then back up. "It feels like it is sometimes. They always do this. Everywhere we go, it's like they're fighting the world, and I'm just stuck with them." I studied his face. He couldn't have been more than 19 or 20. He wasn't a child, but he wasn't quite free from them either. His voice carried years of exhaustion, the kind that didn't come from just one bad flight, but from a lifetime of being overshadowed. "You weren't stuck today," I said gently. "You spoke up. That was brave." He gave a small, bitter laugh. It didn't feel brave. It felt like I was betraying them, but I couldn't lie anymore. Not when everyone could see the truth. I wanted to tell him that what he did mattered, not just for me but for himself. That moment he spoke up, it was the crack in the armor of control his sisters had built around him. But before I could say anything, the sisters appeared at the far end of the carousel, their sharp voices cutting through the noise as they argued with the security officer still shadowing them. Their eyes swept the room like predators searching for prey. The brother tensed. "I should go before they find me." I nodded. "Take care of yourself." He hesitated, then said softly, "Thanks for standing your ground. It showed me I could too." And just like that, he was gone, slipping into the crowd before his sisters spotted him. My suitcase finally came around, and I lifted it from the carousel, the weight grounding me. As I walked toward the exit, I realized how much the day had taken out of me, but mixed with the exhaustion was something else, a quiet pride. Outside the airport, the cool evening air hit my face. I paused on the curb, watching taxis and rideshares pull up, people rushing into cars, their journeys continuing. My journey, I realized, wasn't just about reaching a destination anymore. Something deeper had happened on that flight, something That taught me a lesson I hadn't expected. I thought back to the moment on the plane when I almost gave in, when fear and discomfort nearly pushed me to surrender my seat. If I had, maybe the sisters would have been smugly satisfied. The flight would have been quieter and I would have avoided all the drama, but I also would have walked away feeling small, diminished, invisible. By refusing to move, I hadn't just kept a window seat, I had kept my dignity. And in doing so, I had sparked something in their brother too. Standing up to entitlement wasn't just about me. It was about showing others, maybe even people trapped in the orbit of selfishness, it was possible to say no, that it was possible to reclaim space, even in the tightest corners of life. That night, after finally reaching my hotel, I sat by the window with a cup of tea. The city lights glittered below, but my mind was still in the clouds above, with quiet strength of that window seat. I replayed the looks on people's faces during the confrontation. The man who muttered, "Just sit down already." The woman who told the sisters to stop disturbing everyone. The chuckles that rippled when the sisters' lies fell apart. We hadn't been a team, not formally. But in that pressurized cabin we had stood together against entitlement. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized something profound. Respect is a fragile currency. It's earned, not demanded. Those who scream for it, who try to bully it out of others, end up with nothing but resentment. But those who quietly defend their dignity, who stand their ground without shouting, often inspire more respect than they realized on the next day. As I scrolled through the news on my phone, I wasn't surprised to see a headline about unruly passengers causing flight delays. No names were given, of course, but I knew exactly who it was about. I could picture the sisters reading the article, fuming that the world didn't see them as victims but as troublemakers. Maybe it would teach them a lesson. Maybe it wouldn't, but the brother that was different. I hoped that moment in the terminal, when he spoke up, was just the beginning for him. I hoped he would carry it forward, use it as fuel to break free from their control, and for me, I knew I'd carry it too. The next time I faced someone trying to push me aside, to make me smaller, I'd remember that flight. I'd remember the seat I defended, the truth that prevailed, and the strength I didn't know I had until I needed it. Weeks later, when people asked me about my trip, I didn't tell them about the meetings I attended or the sights I saw. I told them about the flight, about the screaming sisters, the quiet brother, the cabin full of strangers who watched entitlement crumble in real time. And every time I told it, people nodded, smiled, sometimes laughed, because everyone had met people like the sisters before. Everyone knew what it was like to face entitlement, to feel pressured into giving up something you deserved. And everyone needed the reminder that you don't have to dot. In the end, the story wasn't about a seat at all. It was about boundaries, dignity, and courage. It was about the moment you realize that saying no isn't selfish, it's necessary. As I sit here now, writing this final chapter, I can still see the clouds outside that window, glowing golden in the sunlight. That view was worth defending. But more than that, my self-respect was worth defending, and sometimes that's all it takes. A single moment of refusal to change not just your own journey, but someone else's too.